The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, religion, and business. We will explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they have been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I am your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr., and joining us on today's program is Reverend Wyatt T. Walker, pastor of Canaan Baptist Church in Harlem and chief of staff to Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. during those great days we call the days of the Civil Rights Revolution. You marched many times with Dr. King, and one of the things that we are concerned about now is the fact that we don't march any longer because we think we've made the kind of progress that King wanted us to have, that he fought for, that he died for. As you think back now, what was the significance and the main energy and purpose that went into those marches? And we were talking about 1955 and 1957 and 1960.
The primary thrust of this technique of marches was to provide an entry level for people to participate in great struggles with minimal effort. It doesn't take much effort in the nonviolent arena for a person to say march a few blocks or to march in front of a Woolworths store or to march downtown. It was one of the ways in which you can include a great number of people and to give witness to the moral issue that was at stake.
Now that's a very interesting point because we were talking earlier about the morality issue. See, the civil rights movement, in my opinion, was built on the morality issue, the immorality of segregation. And the marches helped to bring that to the fore and got the white representatives, the Supreme Court and others to go along with this. Then we have the situation which we have now, which is a reaction to the progress that African Americans have made. So how does the morality issue, or how has it changed, I should say, from the 50s and 60s to now, and what has caused that change?
Well, it has been a reduction in the moral climate in the nation. The nonviolent stratagem depends or presumes a moral response. Gandhi in India, because there was the history of the British Empire and the Church of England and the Queen or King being the head of at least the titular head of the Church of England, you know, they could anticipate a moral response. What has happened in America today, we've had such a dilution of morality that it's what I call the age of anything. Whatever people want to do, they do it in America. And so our nonviolent protests are like banging up against a brick wall because America at this moment in time does not have the capacity to respond in a moral arena. You've had the Southern Baptist Church, the largest Protestant congregation in America, come out recently saying that they're going to have an aggressive and intentional campaign to defeat Dr. Foster's nomination as Surgeon General. Now, in the 45 years of my public life, the Southern Baptist Convention, to my knowledge, has never come out on any issue. They did not come out on segregation. They did not come out, certainly did not come out on slavery. They did not come out on apartheid. They did not come out on Nicaragua. And all of a sudden here, the largest Protestant denomination decides they're going to have a campaign which involves staff and machinery and money to influence the public that this man is unfit for the post to which he's been nominated. And he only did that which was medically sound and which was legally sound. So if the largest Protestant denomination has this lack of morality, what can you expect from the rest of the nation, which may or may not be religious?
Well, let's go back to the 50s and 60s and ask ourselves the question, even though it was a moral crusade, was America's response a moral response, or was it a political response, given what was happening in the Soviet Union and communism, et cetera?
Well, I think the last phrase that you used touched on it. The presence and the reality of a Cold War gave us an advantage that we do not have in this moment. Here we were purporting to be a democracy, the moral leader of the world, and you had people in our own backyards, because of the color of their skin, were being discriminated against, disfranchised from voting, and having different kinds of lynchings that were going on in the United States. And so in the community, in the World Court of Nations, America did not want to look bad. So it was as much political it was as well as it was moral. Now, it was moral in the sense that we raised the moral issue on the basis of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and our humanity. And because much of the leadership was then our religious leadership, that gave it a moral tone. But I think you're quite right in defining it as more a political response as over against a moral response to our crusade.
Well, what do you say to some of the younger African Americans who say that the day of nonviolence is over, the day of marching is over, and what we really need to do is to go to the streets and tear up some of these cities so that people will respond to us? I personally don't feel that, but I know that there are some people who do say that.
Well, I had some students at Florida A&M confront me when I was there for the formal opening a couple of years ago, and they challenged me about the validity of nonviolence. I told them, well, if you suggest there's an option, then you take it. Why don't you go downtown? We were in Tallahassee, of course, and bomb the state capitol. The senselessness of violence, if you look at the record, is that we always tear up our own neighborhoods. We never come down to Fifth Avenue or go into Westchester in the fancy districts to do our it is a matter of rage and self-hatred which we vent on ourselves. And the other thing is the numerical strength of white versus black does not make sense. We do not have the weapons. It is counterproductive. And every time we have had some kind of violent outbreak, it is the black community that suffers more, because then the opposition then becomes more inflexible on our demands for truth and justice.
But what do you say to the folks who say, well, in 1968, when Dr. King was assassinated, this whole country exploded, city after city after city. In many of these cities, as a result of this, set up human rights commissions, set up economic development commissions, gave more scholarships, etc. Now, we know that what's happened is those things have gone down because they may not have been started for the right purpose. But how do you respond to the younger folks who say these folks only respond to pressure?
Well, I think they're right when they say they only respond to pressure, but the changes that were manifested then were at best cosmetic, and as you indicated, they did not last. What we need is long-term solutions to long-term problems, and this nation has not come to grips with biting the bullet to do something about racism. I was on a panel just a few days ago, and I said that W.E.B. Du Bois said in 1896 that the problem of the 20th century is the color line. And here we are in 1995, and he echoes the same truth, that the problem of the 21st century is the color line. We have gone backwards on the issue of race in the last 12 to 15 years. Most of the gains that we made in the period of the movement have been diluted or neutralized. It is post-Reconstruction all over again. Racism in this country has been cyclical. We make a few gains, we go forward 2 steps, and then we go backward 3 steps, and that's where we are. We're in 20th century post-Reconstruction right now, in my view.
Well, don't you think that the changes in the demography of the country, it's estimated that by 2040, 2045, half of this country will be people of color, Latinos, Africans, and Asians. Don't you think that'll have some impact on the way the society operates, particularly since more and more of the electorate will be people of color?
Well, I think it could have. It's a question of whether we can do the hard spade work to develop a coalition between the white poor, between blacks, between Latinos, and Hispanics. Because in California and New York and Pennsylvania, Texas, those 3 states can elect the President of the United States. Now, and if we would do the spade work and get ready, it is those 3 states and the electoral college would determine who the president is going to be, and you're going to have a minority population by the year 2000, maybe 2005. But I do not see the work proceeding now to form those coalitions. The ethnic differences, our sense of race consciousness and ancestry have been raised to the point that we have become narrow in our pursuits rather than looking at the broad picture of what we need to do. We came very close to it in the Poor People's Campaign, of developing the kind of meaningful political coalition that could have had an impact. But the assassination of Dr. King so demoralized us that I think we have not gotten back to it again.
Well, Jesse Jackson, in developing the Rainbow Coalition in 1984 and 88, was trying to move in that direction.
Yes, and now I think what the problem is, Roscoe, is that the Hispanic community and the other communities which are aggrieved as we are have not had the experience of struggle over 50 or 60 years as we have. And even the Rainbow Coalition, when it manifests itself, it comes out as a black struggle when it needs to be, as you suggested, a rainbow operation. And I don't know what the solution is to bridge that, but I know it takes a lot of hard work to bring together that kind of coalition, which for us to change the political demographics in this country are absolutely necessary. It cannot be done without a coalition of the Hispanics, the Latinos, the white poor, and blacks as they are presently situated.
Well, let's go back a little bit. Talking about hard work, we romanticize the civil rights movement, we romanticize the marches, etc. I know for a fact that you folks had a lot of hard decisions to make, and you were the chief of staff to Dr. King in the Southern Christian Leadership Group. King was the president, the leader. How did you balance out your two roles? Was it a collective decision? Was it King made the decision and you folks followed? Were all the ministers involved in the decision? How did you actually operate? Because that might be instructive for us today in terms of how do we reform our coalitions.
Dr. King had an informal leadership group that he called the executive staff. That would have been at that time in history, it would have been C.T. Vivian, who was our director of affiliates. It was Andrew Young, who was our program director, Dorothy Cotton, Septima Clark, Ralph Abernathy, Fred Shuttlesworth, and myself, and probably the Joe Lowry, who was like the old man of the movement at that time, but he's still going strong.
Still going strong.
Yeah. And the executive committee would respond and react to the recommendations that Dr. King made. My task was strictly as a staff person. I was to implement the policy decisions that were made. Dr. King would say that we want to go to Birmingham. This is what we need to do. We've got to create a crisis there to bring the city to a screeching halt. Wyatt, I need you to find the key to what that crisis is. And that's the way it developed. I was a nuts and bolts person. And the policy decisions were made by Dr. King's inner circle of that group that I mentioned. I should have mentioned James Bevel also, because he had a very astute and mind and strategic sense of how things should get done.
Well, when the 4 little girls were killed in Birmingham, that was one of the crucial public things in the civil rights movement that got people excited. How did you handle that? How did Dr. King and you decide to handle that?
Well, see, we had an internal problem that the public never realized. We had been to Birmingham and had that great movement and had extracted a modicum of decisions about the city being desegregated. And this was about 5 months later. This was May we had the truce, and then in September the bombing came. And the internal problem for us was that people in their grief thought, well, if Dr. King and SCLC had not come to Birmingham, these children wouldn't have died. So we were walking a very thin tightrope on trying to heal the wounds and the griefs of the people, at the same time show that justifiably we needed to come to Birmingham because there are always casualties in struggles, and unfortunately these 4 girls were casualties. I think the only parent who really understood this was Chris McNair, who later went on to the legislature in Alabama. He understood that this was a part of the progression of how people come to their political and human rights liberation. Very unfortunate, but it was a very tough time for Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, because people blamed us that if we had not come there to demonstrate, these 4 little girls would not have been harmed.
What do you think was the crucial factor, the crucial thing that happened that turned the tide in favor of the Civil Rights Bill and in favor of breaking the bonds of segregation and discrimination? What was the pivotal event, if there was such a pivotal event?
Well, I think it is undeniably true that the Birmingham campaign remains the chief watershed of the nonviolent revolution. Up to the time of Birmingham, Dr. King was looked upon by the media and the opposition as a demagogue, a religious demagogue, and that he was running into these cities when we needed money to have a demonstration, which is so far from the truth. You can't arrange demonstrations like we had without like 5 or 6 or 7 months of careful planning. You got to raise the funds. You got to plan for the people going to jail, how you going to get them out when it's bail time, you know. But that's a superficial look at it. But so I think Birmingham, and right behind that, the savage bombing of the church which killed those 4 girls, created a climate and sentiment in the nation that something had to be done on this matter of racism. Birmingham itself, the people there would never have talked to us had it not been for the fact that our movement was so powerful that city ground to a screeching halt. There was no way they could operate. They could not open up because the movement was so powerful. So they didn't talk to us on a moral grounds. They wanted to do business, and they had to solve the problem of how they're going to do business and get rid of the demonstrations.
Okay, bring us to 1995.
Well,
some of that same strategy operate today.
Oh, it is all absolutely valid for now, except that with the Birmingham movement and the 64 Civil Rights Bill and the 65 Voting Rights Act and the massive changes in the political demographics of the South, and you know, we have more black elected officials in the South than we do in the North. Everybody then, not everybody, many of the pundits began to say that, well, the day of mass demonstration, what we got to do now is mobilize our political power, see? But the political power has not been deliverable. Either our black elected officials cannot or they will not deliver for the communities that they represent, or that our political muscle is only marginal at best, since we only make up about 12 or 15% of the population in America. The very fact that you have a black caucus with 40-odd members, and they have been stripped of their real power and lobbying force, you know, by this new gang of Gingrich and company, is an evidence that we cannot expect to be delivered by the political process. So it is that I think we made a mistake in buying into the rationale that the day of mass marches is over. It is a sad commentary that we have not marched since the Poor People's Campaign on a national basis. Now, we've had some ceremonial marches, but that doesn't count. I really think that the time has come when we've got to shut down cities. We've got to shut down the Detroits and the New Yorks and the Atlantas on the basis of the establishment of justice. Until we do that, I don't think there's going to be any breakthrough in racism. Dr. King said in 1963 when we left Birmingham, and this is at the heart of the problem, because it is economic injustice that we suffer from. He says until there's a change in the construct of the capitalist system in America, we cannot make any major breakthrough in racism.
Well, it's interesting. The average income of the average black family today is about 56%, 57% of the average white family. When the civil rights movement started, it was about 55. In the middle of the 70s, at the height, it was about 63. So what it says that the African Americans are still marginal economically, yet people talk about the $300 billion or $30 billion market, consumer market, and that we ought to be doing something more in our own community. And they frequently relate to the Jewish community as a community that has developed economic power and therefore have had political power. Are there not some lessons for the African American community in that area?
Oh, absolutely. I think what we need to understand is that the people who say you need to take that $30 billion consumer, you can't really take that because people have to have shelter and clothes and light and heat and transportation. That is not the kind of capital you develop into strength for an identifiable community.
That's institutional capital. You got to pay your electric bill.
Exactly. See, what we need to do is study very carefully the Jewish mystique. Every Jewish person I've ever met, if there's something that you want to tell you, I know somebody who can get it for you. We need to work on networking our consumer dollars. That's the way you develop strength, so that by saving and inducing thrift, you build an economic base on which you can gain strength. Now, the primary economic base for black people in America, surprisingly to a lot of people, is the black church. More real wealth is controlled by the black church enterprise in America than anywhere else. We employ more people. We have more real collateral worth. We have got more cash flow of dollars. And we've got to find somebody who can design a way by which we can invest and leverage that great mass of money into some national impact on the justice issue.
Well, you see, many people in the African-American community criticize the black church for not doing that, saying that the black churches are isolated, the pastors are interested in developing their own esteem and their own reputations, and they don't link together. Now, I know for a fact that you were involved in one of those collectives dealing with products and getting money back to the black church. Well, that was about 10, 15 years ago. What really happened with that, and why did that activity not develop as logically it might with all this mass of people with resources?
See, the people who make that criticism are uninformed. Usually they are people who don't frequent black churches. They don't know what's going on in black churches, so they're not qualified to criticize.
Number one, right?
Number one. Number two, the Congress of National Black Churches has, in a very creative way, developed a means by which our liability insurance is covered under one umbrella. And every year for the last several years, my church gets a rebate, which means more money that I have to use for ministries in the community that I serve. Now, I'm a local church, one congregation. We've created 700 units of affordable housing. We run an ambitious senior citizens program. We have 15 or 16 other ministries, HIV, substance abuse, adult literacy, tutorial program, and this is replicated in thousands of black churches all across the land, but people do not recognize it.
That's true. It is replicated in thousands, but it should be replicated in tens of thousands. The Wyatt Walkers, the Moran Westons, the Calvin Buttses, those folks, the Clarence Grants at Convent, those folks do things and people see them and relate to them, but then they say, what about my church over here? What about my church over here? One of the things that some of us talk about, churches ought to be open during the week, but many of the churches aren't open during the week. What is needed to move more of the churches in the direction that you and others like you are moving?
I would hazard a guess, without fear of contradiction, that most black churches are open on a more regular basis than any other activity in black life. We're into child care, we're into housing development, we're into senior citizen services. The predominant amount of housing in the public sector in this nation has been sponsored by black churches.
Clearly.
But people, my church, along with Moran Weston, built more housing in the city of New York in the last 25 years than the city of New York built. That's a sad commentary.
Oh, in the city of New York.
Yeah, it's a sad commentary on the city of New York.
Now, but again, to move, let's say King would be with us. What would King be saying in terms of mobilizing this great resource of the black church? What would he be doing?
I think King would be encouraging us to develop our credit union movement, where again, in black life, the great amount of credit unions are in black churches, trying to find some way to network, as you suggested, leveraging the monies that are in those credit unions for the benefit of the communities in which they are posited. We don't have a commercial bank in New York City, as you know. That is one of the great challenges of black church. With all of the cash flow that runs through our churches on a given weekend, there's no reason why we shouldn't have a commercial black bank in New York.
Where does the leadership come from to do that?
Well, I think you've got to have it come from different sources. The resource, the primary resource is, of course, the black church, because that's where you have more people, your investors, and the cash flow. But you see, I guess I'm unique. I'm probably one of the few black preachers who has been a banker, like Moran Weston. But we need to have people from other disciplines, and this is the criticism that I make of upscale black folks. When they make it, they leave the folk church, but the strength of black community is in the folk church. We need the economists and the lawyers and the doctors and the physicians and the neurosurgeons to stay with the black church instead of going and becoming Episcopalians and Roman Catholics, etc. Nothing personal, but we need those skills to make the black church retool to facilitate the black church retooling itself for the crisis needs that exist now in 1995. And I think this is where Dr. King would be spending his energies, trying to increase the efficiency of the black church enterprise.
Well, see, Dr. King was a drum major in his last speech, drum major for justice. Where are drum majors? Or do we need drum majors to mobilize us in the African American community?
We do, but you can't have drum majors. A drum major is of no use without a band.
Mm-hmm. And where's the band?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Our weakness at this present moment is that we have so many disparate views that nobody is willing to develop the fellowship. Dr. King would always say he couldn't do anything without the ground crew. Mm-hmm. You've got to have people who are mobilized. I couldn't do any of the things that I do if it were not for a congregation that supports me and my ideas and my vision of how we can make an impact on that section of Harlem in which we live. But you can't do it without fellowship, and we've got so many siren calls out here giving us options that really won't work, such as the so-called Louis Farrakhan mystique, which I think is a hoax that has been perpetrated on America.
And of course, television helps to develop these new leaders, these sirens, as you say.
It corrupts them. It's more corruption than development, because people began then to associate leadership with prominence, and leadership comes from service, not from prominence.
Well, of course, that's why Wyatt Walker is an African-American legend. That's why Martin Luther King Jr. is an African-American legend, and many of the other people who've been in the church who provided some of this leadership. So if I were to ask you, what advice would you give to young people, people in their 20s and 30s, African-Americans? What can they do to help change things? What would you say?
The most important thing is to find some arena in which they could take their skills and training and serve humanity. And it is from that you develop leadership. And I do not know a better quarter in which to operate than the black church arena, because it is the last place in American life where black people make the final decision about what they're going to do.
That's a beautiful way to end our discussion with Reverend Wyatt T. Walker of Canaan Baptist Church. We've talked beautifully about the civil rights movement and where African Americans need to go in the 1990s and the 21st century. Thanks to Wyatt Walker for being with us on today's African American Legend.